Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 76th day of the 108th Legislature, first session. Our chaplain for today is Senator Clemens. Please rise.
Please join me in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for this spring day. We thank you for the blessings that we've received. I pray a blessing over each of our senators and all of our staff. We thank you for their good work for us. We pray, Lord, that you'll give us wisdom and discernment and patience and self-control today. I ask you, Lord, to be with each one of us as we go throughout this day. In Jesus' name, amen.
I recognize Senator Holcroft for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I call to order the 76th day of the 108th Legislature, first session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections this
Are there any
morning.
messages, reports, or announcements?
There are, Mr. President. Amendment to be printed from Senator Holcroft to LB 157. That's all I have this time.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We'll now proceed to the first item on the agenda.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 814 on select file. First of all,
We have an announcement from Speaker Arch and then Senator DeKay. Speaker Arch.
Thank you. Colleagues, I'm going to change things up a bit this morning, provide my weekly scheduling announcement a day early. First of all, I've been getting several questions about when LB 574 will be rescheduled for debate. I've decided to schedule the bill for next Tuesday at end of the day. Today, after the select file debate of budget bills LB 814 and 818, we'll take up Senator Breezy's property tax bill LB 243 for a couple of hours. Tomorrow, we will complete the debate on LB 243, then move on to LB 754, the income tax bill. Last week, I'd announced tomorrow could be a late night. At this point, today's head start on the debate of LB 243 should allow us to work through the lunch hour tomorrow and then adjourn around 3:30 for our 4-day weekend. Tuesday, we will take up on general file LB 727, the Revenue Committee's priority bill, followed by, as I mentioned, LB 574. On Wednesday and Thursday, we will have final reading of the budget package bills. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No further announcements. Mr. Clerk for items.
Mr. President, first item on the agenda, Legislative Bill 814 on select file. First of all, Senator, there are E&R amendments.
Senator Ballard for a motion.
Mr. President, I move the E&R amendments to LB 814 be adopted.
You've heard the motion. It is a debatable motion. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is a debatable motion. So, you know me, if I can talk, I guess I'm going to. So LB 814, back at it. Some observations from yesterday. Members of the Appropriations Committee who have not spoken on a single budget bill talked yesterday. Not on a budget bill, though. Not on a budget bill, just to help take time on Senator Sanders' bill. I thought that was fascinating. I had thought that perhaps members of the Appropriations Committee who hadn't spoken are adverse to speaking on the microphone, and maybe that's why. And that's, everybody has their style. Some people don't like to talk on the microphone, but I guess I was wrong. They just don't like to talk on the bills that they're supposed to be helping educate the body about. So there we are. I'm hopeful that today's budget debate, it's shorter, it's not 8 hours, it's only 4. So I'm hopeful that today's budget debate will yield some interaction, some conversation outside of just me rolling on, reading the budget again. So I think that would be nice for the people of Nebraska to see an actual debate on the budget. I'm trying to find where I left off on the budget. I know I didn't read the whole thing. I've read most of the Martian, but that's really just the descriptor. I haven't read most of the bill itself to the body, so we'll probably get back to that. I think I've gone through program or agency 25 for the most part. I think I've gone through most of that. On page 41 of, well, I assume the amendment, because we didn't really maybe we made changes. Page 41 of AM 915, which was the amendment that we adopted on general file, is where the behavioral health aid is. And I bring that up because that's something that I have expressed concern over numerous times, is that we're taking money out of the behavioral health aid and putting it into the general funds to pay our claims. And I doubt that anyone is paying that close of attention to how I vote on things, but I did vote for the claims bill because I do believe we should pay our debts. And as many problems as I may have with a lot of things that we are doing with the budget, I don't think that we should be in good stead with paying our debts. So I did vote for the claims bill. Okay, so I'm just trying to decide if I should start back on page 40 or 41. Page 41 of AM 915. And I apologize. I'm not going to print more documents unnecessarily. So I don't have a copy of the ENR or how the bill stands now. So I'm reading off it. So I'll reference AM 915. So if people are looking at what I am reading, they can go to the website and pull that AM. So behavioral health aid, general fund, $84,505,211. Cash fund, $17,925,000. Federal funds estimated $10,504,000. Program total, $112,935,182. They're included in the appropriation to this
1
program.
minute.
Thank you. For FY 2023-24, $84,505,000 just restates those amounts. There is included in the appropriation of this program, and then it has the amounts for the next FY. It's the intent of the legislature that any provider rate increases in FY 22-23 and 21-22 and 22-23 continue in the appropriation to this program, and that any provider rate increases appropriated in this biennium are in addition to such increases. So that is good. It is the intent of the legislature that any appropriation to the Department for Behavioral Health Aid and designated as funding to be allocated to a behavioral health region shall be utilized to provide activities pursuant to the approved annual
That's your
budget.
time, Senator, and you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to the approved annual budget of the behavioral health region or additional activities identified through need to demonstrate the region throughout the year. Whenever circumstances occur during the budget year that impact the initial projected behavioral health region budget, the Director of Behavioral Health shall allow for reassignment of funds between service categories of no more than 20% to accommodate emerging needs identified by the behavioral health region to maximize the ability of the region to implement new behavioral health services and supports or expand existing capacity in existing services. If the reassignment of funds between service categories exceeds 20%, the director shall determine whether to approve the reassignment of funding within 30 calendar days after receiving a request by the behavioral health region. This is something that came in front of HHS, a question as to whether or not regions can have latitude on shifting funds around to more appropriate usage without prior approval. They have to request approval, and if it's not approved, I already know, I read the end, that if it's not approved within 30 days, it's automatically assumed to be approved and they can do it. Included in aid for this program, 6.5 million cash funds for state aid for the distribution of national opioid settlement funds, which shall only be used for such purpose. I realize now that I did read this on general. So I am going to skip forward to page 44. Oh, and get back in the queue. Page 44, line 22, AM 915, LB 814. The Department of Administrative Services shall monitor the appropriations and expenditures for this program according to the following program classifications. Number 35, Office of Juvenile Services. Number 371, Youth Rehabilitation Treatment Center, Hastings, Lincoln. Number 374, Youth Rehabilitation Treatment Center, Kearney. It's interesting. Number 371, it's Hastings / Lincoln. I wonder why they're not their own number, so I'm going to the program book. My desk is piled. My staff member came to my desk a couple days ago and took away some binders that were not of essential need. And there were, I think she took away like 10. They were in all my drawers. I don't have a problem. I don't know. I don't have a binder problem. I don't need an intervention on binders. Okay, so I thought maybe these were program numbers, but they're not. It says numbers, but they're not in the program. They're not in the LFO directory. Are they? Maybe they are. 3, maybe. No, they are not. Well, I'll figure that out later. Okay, there is included in the appropriation to this program for FY 23-24, 1 million cash funds for mental health services to juvenile offenders under section 43-407 from the Nebraska Healthcare Cash Fund. There is included in the appropriation to this program for FY 24-25.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. 1 million cash funds for the mental health services for juvenile offenders. Again, insurance. There is included in the appropriation to this program 26.3 million general funds, 7 million cash funds, 98.6 million federal funds estimated for state aid, which shall only be used for such purpose. There is included in the appropriation to this program. And it lays it out again. Lays it out again for the next year. And, there is included in the appropriation for this program, FY 23-24, 6.8 million cash funds for state aid from the Nebraska Healthcare Cash Fund. There's included in this appropriation for this program, 6.8 million for the next year. And there is included in the amount shown as aid for this program for FY.
That's your time,
Thank
Senator.
you, Mr. President.
Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of LB 814, but I do have some questions that I don't think have been asked on the mic during debate that I'd like clarified before we move forward. And I would ask Senator Lippincott to please yield.
Senator Lippincott, would you yield to some questions?
Yes.
Senator Lippincott is a quick question. So LB 470, which is Senator McDonald's part of the bill, one of the many parts that he has in that bill, was in reference to reimbursement rates to match provider rates for an increase for medical services. And you voted no on that. Can you tell me why you voted no? Do you remember?
No,
LB 470, Senator McDonald's bill. It shows that you were a no vote on it. Does that ring a bell? If not, there's 2 other people I can ask. I'm just curious what the discussion was and why there was opposition to it.
You'll have to give me some more information.
All right, thank you, Senator Lippincott. I would ask that Senator Erdman yield to a question.
Senator Erdman, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Erdman, do you remember the hearing or do you remember the vote on LB 470 to include this into the bill? It was a Senator McDonald bill, the reimbursement rates to match provider rates that increase medical services, and you voted no. I'm just curious why you voted no.
Can you restate that? I had trouble hearing you.
LB 470, can you hear me okay? Okay. LB 470, and I said it really fast because we only have a few minutes, is a Senator McDonald bill, and it's included in this packet. And the vote to include it in the packet, there were 3 no votes, and you were one of them. And the bill is for the reimbursement rates to match provider rates and for their increase in medical services. And I was just curious if you remembered why you voted no.
When we had a hearing, when we had our hearings on appropriations, we heard numerous bills, and we did not know at that time how much funding there would be available to things. And we needed to make sure that it all fit in the package, that we didn't overspend or appropriate what we had to appropriate. So you have to hold back some of that to make sure that you have the funds available to do what you're asked to do.
So that was your reasoning for the no vote. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I might ask that Senator McDonald yield to a question.
Senator McDonald, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator McDonald, LB 470, great bill included in this bill. Just a quick question. You had 3 no votes. I've heard one person give some reasoning. Do you remember what the opposition was?
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening earlier. I was talking to another senator. I do not.
All right, well, I managed to get absolutely nothing done on my turn on the mic here today. I'm concerned. We have a lot of big omnibus bills that are coming through. And one yesterday was a really good example. If you look at some of these bills, they have opposition, they have no votes, they're not coming out 8-0, and we're not questioning a lot of them. So I just want to really encourage people to make sure that you look at the committee statement and then you start going and seeing what information is available in the transcripts. And you ask people, why did you vote no? Or you ask the organizations, why don't you support this bill? Because of how we're rushing through things, and I know it seems like we're not rushing through things, but we really are if you look at the omnibus bills. I don't think all of you have a clear understanding, and I don't mean this in an insulting way. I mean that, you're drinking from a fire hose of some of the things that you're voting through. And once it becomes law, it becomes somebody else's problem. So I just encourage people to make sure that you are reading those committee statements, you are looking at what the votes are, you are looking at the pros and the cons, and do your research. You're just hanging out now anyway and chatting with people while things are being filibustered. Now's a great time to get a clear understanding of what's actually in the bills. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to close. The motion's been made to adopt the E&R amendments. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. They are adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Quickly, an amendment to be printed from Senator John Kavanaugh to LB 574. Additionally, concerning LB 814, Senator Clements would move to amend with AM 1730.
Senator Clemens, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. LB 814 is the mainline budget bill. And it's, we went through a lot of it the other day, and there have been found some technical changes that we need to make. I have 17 of them. I'm going to go through them briefly, and then different senators who have introduced bills regarding that or on those topics will have them give more detail if they like. The first item with the Department of Agriculture, just correcting the health insurance amounts for their employees. Number 2, the Real Property Appraiser Board needed authorization of the salary limit, increase of the salary limit for their employee, and that was $37,000. Number 3, the Commission on Public Advocacy has a retirement, and when we have a retirement, they get carryover sick time or vacation pay. We had to increase the amount of their salary limit to take care of that retirement payout. Number 4, the Coordinating Commission for Post-Secondary Education, changing a name of a program from Community College Gap Program to Higher Education Financial Aid. 5th one, Game and Parks, correcting the salary expenses for temporary workers. There's a correction in the figure there. 6th was Department of Corrections had a typographical error, changed the word proving to providing. Number 7, Department of Education, changing a name of a program there from data research and evaluation to data management and application development. Number 8, Department of Health and Human Services, clarifying an earmark regarding the healthcare cash fund that was originally in LB 802. And let's see, that was That was regarding cancer research, changing a name from a cancer network to a nonprofit organization that does cancer screening. Number 9, let's see, is another Health and Human Services clarifying an earmark relating to food banks. They're going to be using some TANF funds, so we have to add language that they hold a certificate of exemption under Section 501c3, requiring them to be a nonprofit to receive these monies. Number 10, the Nebraska Arts Council, slight change in their appropriation from $1 million to $946,473 in the first year, similar in the second. Number 11, Department of Environmental and Energy Water Well Standards and Contractors Practice Act. We'll have a senator that will be discussing that one. Number 12, Department of Natural Resources. There's allocating ARPA funds to a city of the first class. This is probably going to be Norfolk for a riverfront improvement of $2 million. Number 13, Department of Economic Development, reduce the cash fund. This is on again, that riverfront development. It had been allocated to Game and Parks. We're changing from Game and Parks to ARPA funds because Game and Parks did not have we were over appropriating that program. Number 14, the Nebraska Retirement Board, Public Employee Retirement Board is getting some new software and increasing the amount of the appropriation for some technology upgrades. Number 15, Department of Economic Development, regarding the Lancaster County Agricultural Society, it was the intent to allocate money again from Game and Parks Capital Fund, which didn't have enough in their budget, so that is being removed. Item 16, Department of Correction, regarding vocational and life skills for inmates. It's got $4 million per year for state aid and another $500,000 per year for reentry and restorative justice programming for adult and juvenile offenders. And this was one Senator McKinney and I worked about. They had been having to expend their programming expenses up front and get reimbursed later. This now says that they will be paid in advance on a monthly basis, but required to return unused funds and be subject to reporting, and that will help them with reentry programming for inmates. The last one is number 17, regarding child welfare provider rates. And I would ask Senator Wishart, would you yield to a question?
Senator Wishart, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Senator Wishart, we yesterday met and added this last one on child provider rates. Would you describe that, please?
Yeah, so yesterday we met with all of the child representatives from all of the child welfare entities. They came to negotiation and agreement with the Department of Health and Human Services regarding utilizing carryover ARPA funding that was available within DHHS to cover the next 2 years of provider rates, of their provider rates. So it'd be a 3% increase and a 2% increase over the next 2 years. Instead of utilizing general funds, those will be ARPA funds that will be used for that. There is a commitment, and I've talked with the governor's team as well, that this is a base increase. So moving forward, they will, like all of the other providers, be receiving a base increase of the 3% and 2%. It's just for the next 2 years. are some ARPA funds that are available for the department to use to and not have to use general funds for this. In addition, there is a one-time funding of $1 million that is going to fund a center in a primary class city that goes and supports teenage foster mothers who have nowhere else to go and are going to be new moms. And so I definitely supported that funding as well. And then in addition, there'll be some additional funding that ARPA will be used for 5 specific services that you can see outlined in this amendment, mainly going to support rural child welfare providers, especially dealing with their transportation costs. This is one-time bump of funding for these 5 specific services. But again, I thought it was important for us to support them. This is supported by the child welfare entities across the state, and so I would encourage you to support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Those services are at the bottom of that amendment. Include family support, parenting time, supervised visits, travel time and distance, intensive family preservation, and intensive family reunification regarding child welfare. Thank you. Those were the items that the committee unanimously voted to include in the committee cleanup amendment. And I ask for your green vote, your support on AM 1730. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Hughes, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of AM 1730. I want to thank Chairman Clements and the Appropriations Committee for working with us. Senator Wishart mentioned one of the bills I brought was to provide a $1 million grant to help pregnant and parenting homeless youth. And by the way, there is already $1 million in matching funds for this program outside of the dollars provided by this amendment. Here's the deal. Last year, there were 84 minors in Lincoln alone who were homeless and either parenting a child on the streets or pregnant on the streets. There are hundreds more across our state in the same situation. We don't have an exact number, but one person in this situation is too many. That is why I introduced LB 772. We will do whatever it takes to get this done, to start getting these youth and their kids off the street and into an environment where they can be provided the training and the skills to manage being both a successful parent to their child and becoming a productive citizen. The facility that will be supported by these funds serves not only to provide care and support for the young mother and her child, but also a preventative measure for our state in terms of averting costs down the road. TANF is the source of the funds we were told to use, and that's what we're going to do. These funds will be used to support operations at a facility that will assist getting these homeless youth and their kids off the street. I don't think using temporary assistance for needy families, which is a federal program that provides states with the flexibility in operating programs to help low-income families with children achieve economic self-sufficiency, should be an issue. Homeless youth who are pregnant or with a child are exactly who the TANF program was designed to help. You cannot have a lower income than being homeless. I urge my colleagues to vote green on AM 1730. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you very much. So I know I'll have a little bit of a conversation on things here. I wanted to start by responding to this amendment, a couple of the items that was just being talked about. We did exec on this, in particular the new language that Senator Wishart was discussing and Senator Clements. I have a couple of different additional pieces of information on this that I wanted to make sure was clear. I brought this up in our exec session, which is we, in the past administration, we had issues and some problems with getting funds out to providers. Especially when we had one-time ARPA funds, we had this problem with developmental disabilities, we had this problem with child welfare. It was the reason behind many senators bringing bills to try to address and right that wrong, be very more explicit, pass statutory language. Something that Senator Wishart said that I want to emphasize is there's a commitment made by this new administration that they will make sure that the rebasing will happen, and there's a lot of trust being placed into the new administration. I want to make it clear for the record and the public and my colleagues that we have a responsibility to make sure that we are keeping up with cost of living, being competitive for our providers, for child welfare providers and DD providers are two clear examples. We have to make sure that we're watching this. They have made a commitment that they're going to make sure they're rebasing and not just providing the one-time funds and then letting it sit and letting it go back down, but providing the one-time funds and then re-backfilling it in with general funds in the next biennium. This is going to be important. For those people that have ever been and heard from providers in any of these different subgroups or Medicaid providers or behavioral health or any of them, we just continue to think that if we increase the rates this one time, that it's going to be fine. And what we continue to find out is every year that we lag on getting funds out, every year that we lag on making sure that certain services rates are actually meeting the needs and are getting out to providers, or we're making it harder. And when we also add more administrative tasks on them, that is very costly in terms of the back end, it adds up. It's not something where it's a one and done. So my hope and commitment, many of us won't be here. I know I won't be here in our next biennium budget, is to make sure we follow through on this. The comforting thing and why I supported this is it was two different sides of child welfare that said, hey, we support this, we're self-negotiating, we're trying to come to a deal, which compromised many of these things. So the deal was child welfare, all the providers, the different associations, including Senator Janet Hughes's bill, was also included as part of this. It was all one amendment, which is why we took it up in that way, and that's why we added it. So I just want to make clear for the record, I hope that we follow through, and I'm saying this is the hope for the new administration, on getting the dollars out so that they get out to providers, they get out to services, they get out to the wages needed, so don't lose our workforce in this much needed frontline services to Nebraskans.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I'm pleased that we have an opportunity to dig into so many substantive and important issues in regards to the budget measures that are before us. In listening to Senator Clements open and talking to my colleagues who serve on the Appropriations Committee, on the one hand, I was very heartened to hear that there is going to be additional resources provided to child welfare providers across the state. I've introduced 2 measures this year to do just that. To recognize the increased challenges they have with workforce, with inflation, and how critical their work is to ensuring that we have a strong safety net for vulnerable kids. Recognizing that they help families in crisis and families in need stay together or find permanent, safe, and loving homes. Again, this is an area, their work in adoption services, their work in family reunification. This is an area where I think we can find and should find a lot of common ground. So I'm pleased to see that issue rise to a level of greater importance. So perhaps as equally as excited as I am to see some additional resources being provided to the child welfare funds, I'm equally disappointed in the fund source. So this is another raid on the TANF rainy day funds. This is not an appropriate use of these funds. We've had a long discussion about this on general file, yet here we go again. So Nebraska has one of the highest balances in our TANF rainy day funds because we haven't modernized our systems to get those dollars to the families who are working their way out of poverty. They're meant to go to families. They are not meant to pad the bottom lines for nonprofits or any other purpose. In fact, it's not just my opinion. The law is clear that you cannot utilize TANF rainy day funds to supplant other state-funded obligations. So whether it's the food banks, whether it's DV services, whether it's child advocacy centers, whether it's now the child welfare providers, these are all worthy, critical partners in our work in Nebraska. There is no dispersion or judgment about the importance of their incredible good work. But here we are playing games again with cash funds that we don't need to and that are not meant for this purpose. It's unsustainable, it's suspect from a legal perspective, and it's insulting to low-income working families who are working their way out of poverty. These dollars that come from the federal government are meant to go in their pocket. And it's wrong for us to cast judgment that they can't be trusted to figure out what's best for their family. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, myself, Senator John Cavanaugh, all have measures pending before the Health and Human Services Committee that are sustainable and appropriate ways to update our state policy in recognition of the fact that we have had neglect for almost a decade now in regards to this issue. In 2014, then Auditor Foley put forward a report that said your TANF rainy day funds are too high. You need to come up with a plan to direct them to families in need. No action, no action, no action for 10 years. And today, in a day of unprecedented economic prosperity, the Appropriations Committee, in concert with stakeholders in the lobby, has grabbed more money away from needy families for other core obligations. That is legally suspect. It's wrong from a policy perspective. It's insulting. We had a long, robust debate about this on general file, and nobody had the courtesy to provide a heads up to myself or Senator Cavanaugh or the other Senator Cavanaugh who've been working diligently on these issues in regards to a comprehensive and thoughtful plan on the TANF rainy day funds. I'm going to keep hitting my light in on here this morning, but you know, I work in good faith every day, and I'm not saying I get it right every day, and I'm not saying we have to agree. But a simple heads up for an issue that I've been working on in good faith all session and over the entirety of my career, we can't even have a professional courtesy to provide a heads up.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Hughes yield to a question?
Senator Hughes, will you yield to some questions?
Yes, I will.
Senator Hughes, is this appropriation tied to your bill LB 772?
Correct.
Thank you. Would Senator Clements yield to a question?
Senator Clements, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Clements, are you aware that LB 772 is an appropriation for capital construction?
Would you refresh me? I'm not.
That is Senator Hughes's bill for the Cedars facility that you're appropriating $1 million of TANF funds.
Oh.
Are you aware that it's capital construction? Okay.
Probably
Well,
not.
whether you are or you aren't, you can't use TANF for capital construction.
No, I thought.
So maybe we should start doing our due diligence. And to the lobbyists that worked on this, unbelievable. Unbelievable that not a single one of you would have talked to me and just let me know that this was happening. Thank you for the slap in the face. And to the members of the Appropriations Committee, I echo everything that Senator Conrad said. Why would you not have told us? Because you knew what you were doing was wrong. You must love a visceral reaction on the microphone. Otherwise, you would have given me a heads up. Would Senator Vargas yield to a question?
Senator Vargas, would you yield to a question?
Yes,
Senator Vargas, did you vote to include this in this package?
I did, yes.
Thank you. Senator Wishart, would you yield to a question?
Senator Wishart, will you yield to a question?
I will, yes.
Senator Wishart, did you vote to include this in this package?
Yes.
Thank you. Colleagues, I have lost all respect for you. All respect. You can't increase eligibility for our most vulnerable populations, but you can pilfer their money? Cedars can raise the money. But you know who can't raise the money? The people who were denying access to funds, who this money is supposed to be for. And instead of even the smallest of olive branch where you would actually consider including an eligibility increase, you're just going to keep rating it. What's next? What's the next amendment? What else are you going to take out of the TANF funds? How much more are you going to steal out of the mouths of poor children for your pet projects? Whether they are worthy or not, it is not appropriate. And Senator Vargas and Senator Wishart, you know that, or you would have told me. And Senator Hughes brought this bill to HHS. So you can't tell me that you can't increase eligibility because it's an HHS bill, because you're just doing it. You're taking an HHS bill, you're putting it into this amendment. So let's do something about it. Let's do something about it. Appropriations Committee, why don't you do something about it? Why don't you appropriate funds to increase eligibility for children for TANF? Instead of constantly rating it, instead of constantly stealing money from poor children, why don't you do something about it? Unconscionable.
1 minute.
Unconscionable. This is one of the most disgusting displays this session. And you knew it was wrong. You knew it was wrong, or you would have told me. But I mean, I voted for Senator Vargas's food truck, so I guess we're good. You got what you needed out of me, huh? Unconscionable. You are stealing money from children. The poorest children, you are stealing money from them, and you're doing it again, and you're doing it again, and you're doing it again, and it is sickening. You did it for Senator McDonald, and you shouldn't have. You're doing it for Senator Hughes, and you shouldn't. And you know that, and you keep doing it anyways. And you pat yourselves on the back like you're doing something great when you're not. You're stealing from kids. That's what you're doing.
That's your time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
310. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I was hoping Senator Clements would yield to a question.
Senator Clements, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator. As chair of the Appropriations Committee and utilizing TANF rainy day funds now, again, perhaps in unprecedented ways in Nebraska, can you tell me just generally what the current balance of the TANF rainy day funds are as you understand it?
I understand it's over $100 million, as I recall.
I think that's right, and it's probably well north of there. But could you also tell me, in terms of what the committee has put forward in regards to the rate on TANF rainy day funds, what's one-time cost and what's ongoing cost, including with this amendment? So
We have an amendment coming up after this would be for food banks, $10 million one time. This would be $1 million. And I certainly expected this $1 million to be for programming and not for capital construction. In addition, an amendment needs to be filed with the federal government to approve of this $1 million request. And if it's denied because it's not eligible, then it won't be spent.
That's right, Senator, and hopefully we can touch base with the fiscal analyst to get a little bit better handle for the body in terms of what the current balance is, what the proposals do in the short term and the long term. And I appreciate your responses, Senator Clements. Definitely we'll have more to say on this, but I think your last point really should spark a great deal of interest for members if it wasn't clear on general file. The unprecedented utilization of these funds in this manner in Nebraska requires us to ask permission from the federal government to waive the existing law and eligibility and rules about how we utilize these funds because it's not part of the existing statutory scheme. Now, perhaps other states at other times have rated their funds for other reasons, and that's on them. But that's not a model that we should emulate, because we have sustainable, thoughtful solutions before us to address this matter. And it's not a joke, and it's not a game. And we shouldn't be rating these funds that come to us for no other purpose, colleagues, no other purpose than to help the neediest Nebraskans work their way out of poverty. That's the whole reason we get these dollars. We don't get these dollars to then expend however you wish. That's not how these dollars work. Some dollars are fungible, some are not. These are not and should not be. And we should not commit ourselves to this course. It's not just my personal philosophy in regards to how these are utilized. It's inherent in the program design regarding these dollars. Additionally, it's grounded in research. Study after study after study shows the best way to help low-income families work their way out of poverty and lessen their reliance on public assistance is to put cash in their pocket, because they know what's best for their family, whether it's fixing a broken tire that helps them get to work or helps get their kids to school, whether it's the school supplies, thank you, Mr. President, that aren't covered in WIC or TANF or in food stamps or otherwise, but they got to buy their kid a backpack. Whether it's the simple personal care items that their SNAP benefits can't be utilized for, whether it's a birthday cake. This is the testimony we had before the Health and Human Services Committee. And when you provide direct cash assistance to families in need so that they can figure out the best way to survive and get out of poverty, it helps us all. It honors their dignity and autonomy, and it moves people out of poverty faster. So it's a detriment to the families and to the broader society when we don't honor the program design and the fidelity to these funds. And it doesn't matter if the other reasons are good reasons, they are. Then they should be general funded or they should be cash funded.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Wishart, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, it's totally on me for not talking to Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Conrad after we voted on this. I got pulled in a different direction, and I'm sorry about that because I should have, and it didn't happen. Secondly, the reason that, well, first of all, I just philosophically have a different opinion than Senator Conrad and Senator Kavanaugh have in terms of use of TANF funds. I would love to see these bills come out of Health and Human Services and progress, but they haven't. And so we're sitting here in Appropriations Committee with a significant pot of money that can be used to go and support the things that are outlined in TANF. And when we looked at the different investments that we're making out of TANF, whether it be the food banks, whether it be domestic violence, whether it be support for kids who are victims of sexual abuse, or whether it be the operations to go and support a center that supports new mothers and pregnant teens, it is my understanding that those do fall in line of uses for this fund. And the other thing I want to add to this is, well, first of all, these funds cannot be used for capital construction. I acknowledge that and agree with that. The amendment is clear that these are dollars that are going to go to operations. Secondly, this has to be approved by the federal government. And Senator Hughes is aware of that, and I'm aware of that they may say no. They may say this is not an adequate use of TANF funds. The department has to put forward a proposal for the use of these funds, and if they say no, then they say no. I've talked with Chairman Clemens. I'd be willing to look at another funding source for this if the debate continues and that's the direction we want to go. But the reality is that there are a significant amount of needs in this state. And we're going to do everything possible as an appropriations committee to put the funding that we have to good use. And in the long run, I think it is up to the Health and Human Services Committee if they want to spend down these dollars to put forward bills and get those through and onto the floor of the legislature and passed. And I will be one of the senators that will support that. Finally, I want to circle back around and again, apologize one more time. I should have talked to Senator Conrad and Senator Kavanaugh. There's no excuse for it. And again, to my colleagues and my friends, I'm sorry.
Senator Hardin, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. We had a little mix-up. I was supposed to make an announcement this morning, and unfortunately our wires got crossed. That didn't happen earlier, but I would like to do it now. And this is a thank you to all of you. And here it comes. Many of you have received emails from students at Kimball High School in District 48. This is part of an assignment in their civics class. The students choose 5 bills that have been given a priority designation and follow each bill through our legislative process. Part of their assignment is to email the bill's primary introducer, sharing their opinion. The teacher of the class, Mrs. Jerry Ferguson, told me that this year the students have received more replies from members of the legislature than ever before. And I wanted to thank you all for doing that. It's got a huge impact. And Mrs. Ferguson told me that her students have come into class excited to share the replies they received from you. The civics class in Kimball High School is a fantastic class with an amazing teacher. The students learn to be engaged citizens and become involved in their community. Tomorrow's leaders are being formed in that class, and you all engaging with them through email showed them that their voices matter and they're heard. And so I just wanted to thank all of you. I really appreciated that. That has a huge impact on them. And they've actually traveled here. Several of them have to be a part of committee testimony for things. So thank you so much for interacting with them via email. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hardin. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Regarding this item, it's in AM 1730, page 7, starting in line 6. I'd like to read the provision. On page 51, after line 13, insert the following new paragraphs. There is included in the amount shown as aid for this program for fiscal year 23-24, $1 million, federal temporary assistance for needy families funds, to make a grant available for a licensed residential child care agency, which provides outreach services to homeless youth in a city of the primary class as of July 1, 2023, to facilitate housing for pregnant and parenting homeless youth to be located in a city of the primary class. And it has the word housing, but it says to facilitate housing for pregnant and parenting homeless youth. And it's, which I understand that to be programming, not capital construction, and certainly have no intention to have this be capital construction. It's to give the homeless a home and housing. And so that is just wanted to explain and let people take a look for themselves on page 7 of 1730. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Senator Clements, you're wrong. You're just flat out wrong. LB 772 fiscal note clearly states that it's for construction of a facility. Senator Hughes said this is for LB 772. Just because you wrote the language vaguely enough That it doesn't state that it's for capital construction doesn't mean that it isn't for capital construction. So it'll be denied. And I'm building the record for it. It will be denied. The federal government will deny this use of TANF. So all of this will be for naught. I've submitted a floor amendment to strike this language from this amendment because this is an inappropriate use of TANF. It will be denied. We will be penalized 5% of our TANF block grant, more than the $1 million of this, if we inappropriately do this. Maybe, just maybe, if the Appropriations Committee did a better job of understanding TANF and stopped trying to just raid money, Senator Wishart, just because it's there, maybe we wouldn't be doing things like this that violate the federal regulations of the program. Just because the money's there doesn't mean you should take it. It's a program for a purpose. You can't use TANF funds for pregnant women until the 3rd trimester, and they have to be income eligible. Is every woman that's going to be in this $1 million, $2 million facility going to be in their 3rd trimester and income eligible? Are we going to make them document that? If this is so important, use general funds. I'd vote for general funds. Great. We want to give $1 million to Cedars for capital construction for a facility for parenting youth. Great. Use general funds. It's $130 million in the rainy day fund, and we cannot get this body to increase eligibility. Why? Why, Nebraska? Why can't we? Because everybody wants to steal the money for their projects. That's why. If we give more money to the people that the program is intended for, there won't be enough money for us to steal. We'd have to use our general funds, and then we couldn't give massive tax cuts to rich people. So when Senator Wishart says that we don't have money other places, that's because Senator Wishart is voting for the tax cuts. We got to leave money for those tax cuts. We can't use general funds to help people that are poor. We can only use general funds for tax cuts for the wealthy because we are morally bankrupt. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Hughes, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. The original goal with LB 772 was to request $2 million for this facility from the general funds. We then amended it to be a $1 million as a matching grant from, again, the general funds, and that didn't happen. We couldn't get it done. The plan is now to use the funds for ongoing operations that currently exist. This programming is happening, and they are helping the homeless youth in wards of the state who are pregnant or with child. They're using it with existing facilities. So that is the intent now, and maybe we need to change language in the current bill to reflect that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you. Similar to Senator Wishart, I want to apologize. This is something that we should have had a conversation with many different senators. This was an agreement that was come together by people outside the lobby and other senators. When this was brought to us, and I can only speak for myself, I voted for it because of the negotiation that was done with all the other parties on the child welfare provider rates to make sure that we were holding them whole, which I mentioned on the mic previously. And I've had this conversation with Chairman Clements that I think we should fund this through one-time cash reserves or the general funds, because the original intent of the legislation, while I support the original intent of the legislation, the language that we currently have is not meeting or does not align with the intent of the legislation. The original legislation was for capital construction on one-to-one grant funds, which to my understanding was one of the reasons why it was kicked out of committee, that there would be a one-to-one matching component and it was for capital construction. And what this does is does not delineate or make it clear And from the conversations I had with our fiscal analysts, with our fiscal analysts, obviously this would need to be approved, and we would have to claw this back, and we would have to pay it back if it does not qualify, which is what I'm hearing and what I think is going to happen. I will vote to remove the funding and trying to see if we can get an amendment on to do this, because I think it is a worthy bill if it's funded through general funds, and don't want to take it away from the TANF funds. But separately, I also have child welfare providers that have negotiated with each other. And as I mentioned, we've underfunded them in so many different places. I want to make sure that we figure out how to honor those child welfare providers to make sure that they're getting the pay that they're supposed to get, that they haven't gotten for years, well, haven't gotten for this last year that we told them we were going to get them. And I want to make sure to follow through on that. So I will support striking the funds from TANF funds for general funds or cash reserve. It is a conversation I had with Senator Clements, because I don't want to jeopardize the existing funds that we currently have for the child welfare. And again, this is brought to us as a negotiated set of circumstances. And beyond apologies, I think we can actually right this wrong. And I'm asking my colleagues on the floor to do that, because this is a good bill on its own. And we should not have to, TANF shouldn't suffer in terms of the funds. And we shouldn't sort of put a what if in terms of compliance with this, that it will qualify. I don't want to put us in that situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak. This is your last time on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning again, colleagues. So let me just ground this a little bit here. Again, you've heard me refer many times to the treasure trove of information that comes with our district at a glance books. And if you take a look at page 39, which lists poverty statistics for each of our legislative districts, you can see the district that I proudly represent, North Lincoln's Fightin' 46 legislative district, is the second highest in the state in regards to families in poverty. So Senator McKinney's district, District 11, is just a little bit ahead of mine. Who's number 3? Senator Vargas. Who's number 4? Senator McDonald. Who's number 5? Senator Wayne. Then John Kavanaugh. Then Senator Albright, then Jane Raybould, then Senator Hunt, and then finally my friend Senator Wishart to round out the top 10 districts in terms of families living in poverty, okay? So what's at issue here is, it's not personal. For me, it's not even political. It's a policy issue. And it's our job, the way I view my job and my role in this legislature, is to try and be in conversation with everybody when I can, to try and work with all stakeholders in a thoughtful and credible way, but to also remember we all have different roles in this institution and those that have business before this institution. And our voice, our role, at the core of what we're supposed to do as state senators, in my perspective, is to be a voice for the voiceless. And that includes pushing back on our friends who are in the lobby that have a right to be there and have a right to represent their clients' interests. But it's our job to push back on them, because ultimately, even if they're personally committed from an altruistic perspective, they're getting paid. They're getting paid to deliver for their clients. They're getting paid. It's their job to deliver for their clients. And it's their right to do that. It's protected under the First Amendment. But it's our job to push back. It's our job to ask questions. It's our job to be the voice for the voiceless, people who can't afford high-powered lobbyists that have no problem playing a shell game to deliver for their clients, no matter how worthy their clients are. And this is my pushback. Because these dollars shouldn't go to pad the budget of any nonprofit, no matter how worthy, for anything. These dollars are our tax dollars that all Nebraskans pay into the federal government that come back to each state for a specific purpose, to help the poorest families work their way out of poverty for a very limited amount of time. That's what the dollars are for. The reason we have a high unexpected balance in this fund is because there's been a lack of action by state policymakers for 10 years. For 10 years to take up any smart, thoughtful adjustment to modernize and update our approach to TANF. The reason these funds are so high is not because anybody did anything wrong except for this body failed to act. And now they're sitting out there with a high balance and they're being rated by people who are paid to deliver for their clients. That's what's happening. And who hangs in the balance? The voiceless. When we talk about the kind of money we're talking about for TANF, go look at the fiscal note on LB 310 that I brought forward. We're talking about providing a current standard of need of $600 for an individual and $140 for each additional family member. Imagine trying to maintain your family at that level, coupled with inflation, coupled with a pinch at the pump, coupled with increase in childcare. These dollars do not belong anywhere but with the families they were intended to benefit. And I encourage all senators to learn more about the program design and to seek solutions.
Senator Walz has guests in the north balcony, 78 fourth graders from DC West Elementary and Valley. Please stand to be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak, and this is your third opportunity on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've submitted a floor amendment, 2 different floor amendments. The first was just to strike it entirely, which I don't think we should do, but if we're hell-bent on using TANF funds, then we should. The second is to strike temporary assistance for needy families on line 8, page 7, and insert general funds. So if the Appropriations Committee means to do the right thing, then they'll ask the Speaker to schedule that amendment, and we can vote to switch it from TANF to general. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Cavanaugh. I'm seeing no one else in the queue. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have been consulting with my committee members, and I've asked the fiscal office to draft an amendment to switch this $1 million from TANF funds to general funds. And it's going to take a little while to have that amendment prepared, but I certainly didn't intend to violate any TANF regulations, and I was under understanding this is just for programming, and rather than try to continue to work with the TANF funds, I believe that the general fund will have adequate amounts to switch this. It's a one-time expense and not an ongoing program. And so we'll be drafting an amendment to strike this language and come up with language that would switch it over to a general fund appropriation. And with that, I ask for your green vote with this as is. We're going to commit to striking the language that's objectionable. And then if we pass AM 1730, we will then, as soon as a draft amendment is ready, correct that last item in 1730. So I ask for your green vote on 1730 at this time, and we will introduce that amendment for correction as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 1730. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Have all those who wish to vote voted? Mr. Clerk, record.
29 ayes, 3 nays on adoption of AM 1730.
AM 1730 is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, item quickly. Your Committee on Transportation, chaired by Senator Mosher, reports Legislative Bill 600 to general file with committee amendments. New LR 138 from Senator McKinney, as well as LR 139 and LR 140 and 141, all of which are referred to the Executive Board, Mr. President. Concerning the bill, next amendment, Senator DeBoer would offer AM 1662.
Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. This is a bill that, or an amendment that would add intent language only, so it would not add any additional funding to do a audit of our American Rescue Plan Act funds. The auditor and I have discussed this, and Senator Clements, and we've all worked it out that he can do this under the amount of money that has already been appropriated under this budget. I brought this as a bill, and I'm trying to remember my bill number, 578, there it is. I brought it as a bill 578 to the Appropriations Committee. And Senator Clements, I think, will say that it is a friendly amendment. Let me clarify that on the mic. Senator Clements, would you yield to a question?
Senator Clemens, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Clements, would you classify this as a friendly amendment?
Yes, I spoke with Auditor Foley and asked him if he was able to do this within his department, and he agreed, and I consider this a friendly amendment.
All right, thank you, Senator Clements. So what we're wanting to do here is just provide a little extra level of transparency, accountability, whatever you want to call it, to look at how our ARPA funds are getting put out into the various programs that we ask them to go out to under LB 1014. Make sure we're paying attention to where the interest is, that we are following all state, but also all federal requirements. We don't want to have any clawbacks. Obviously, that is an astronomical amount of money. We want to make sure that it's being done in the best possible way. My understanding is that at the end of this audit, there will be some information which can be passed to the various members of this legislature so that we can all look at it together. And of course, the best part is that they will be able to cover it under, they will be able to do this audit under the funds that they are already appropriated under the mainline budget. So I would ask for your support for this intent language to ask for an audit of our ARPA funds. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I want to It's very rare. Number one, start off with just a little bit of a mea culpa. It's pretty rare for me to be that emotional about the issues that are before us. Maybe it's a product of too many late nights, or maybe it's a product of passion. So just want to dial that back and express my lack of composure in terms of the issue that was presented earlier that I was not anticipating having to have a robust debate on this morning, and appreciate any grace extended back towards me as I would extend to other colleagues when perhaps we're not at our best. I also want to thank Senator Clements and members of the Appropriations Committee for being open-minded to changing the funding source in regards to the measure that we had previously just talked about, which again is worthy and important. It just had an inappropriate utilization of funds, as we've talked about many times on General File and again this morning. I believe there'll be an interim study on this topic so that we can have a more comprehensive discussion about how we got to where we got with this TANF rainy day fund issue, and how we craft together a sustainable plan to draw down these funds in an appropriate way. I am also grateful that we have an opportunity to talk about common ground issues like the one Senator Hughes brought forward to assist pregnant and parenting young people. I know my friend Senator Vargas had prioritized a measure earlier in his career to ask the State Board of Education to adopt a model policy for all schools to support pregnant and parenting students. I had the pleasure to work with him on that years ago, and that was a really, really important policy that I know, in talking with impacted members of the community, has made a big difference in ensuring that more young parents can stay in school and be successful, and contributed to their ability to complete their education and raise a healthy family. I want to just also connect the dots there. I definitely support all women and all choices. And I think it's critical, even if we have a different point of view that is sincerely held and authentically held from a different perspective when it comes to reproductive justice or abortion access, there should be no lack of enthusiasm for our ability to find common ground and consensus on supporting families in need, on ensuring that pregnant people in Nebraska have access to health care, whether that's through their pregnancy or postpartum. I would be very excited. I know Senator Sanders has been contemplating a robust interim study on ensuring we have one of the strongest and best adoption systems in the country. I think that would be a wonderful thing for us to come together and work on. Same goes with prevention. But let me be clear, colleagues, and we're going to take it up again next week when we have the 574-626 combination debate. You look at the statistics, abortion statistics from Nebraskans year over year over year, and they tell us why they're seeking abortion care.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well over 50% typically of Nebraskans who are seeking abortion care do so for economic reasons. They do it for economic reasons. Abortion is a kitchen table issue. If you want to lessen the amount of unintended pregnancies, and if you want to lessen the amount of abortions, you got to build the safety net. You got to build the safety net. And you will find unbridled enthusiasm from myself and others to do that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Erdman, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. This is a, what shall I say, peculiar amendment. So I believe that we've spoken with, or someone has, with the auditor. He's agreed to do this. So wouldn't that be sufficient? We call up Auditor Foley. We say, Auditor, we would like you to do an accounting of the ARPA funds. And he said, sure, I can do that. But then we have to have a bill to ask him to do that. He's already agreed that he can do that within the funds that he currently has. And so we have to have an amendment to make sure that he understands what we ask him to do. He's an intelligent person. Call him up and say, Auditor Foley, we'd like you to do the ARPA funds audit. Got it, he says. I'll do it. But just a minute, just so you know we're serious, we're going to put in an amendment in the budget that says you should do an audit of the ARPA funds. So the point is, and generally this is what the decision is made, is what happens if we don't do this? He audits the ARPA funds. So I'm really struggling to see how this is significantly important that we vote on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I still am in support of this AM 1662. I was actually thinking about having an interim study on ARPA funds, and this will eliminate the need for that. I appreciate the auditor's cooperation to do this. One thing I failed to mention regarding the previous issue with the housing for pregnant and parenting homeless youth, and the other part of that was child welfare. The child welfare providers are getting a 3%, then 2% increase. And this amendment funds that with ARPA dollars. Health and Human Services had about $15 million of ARPA dollars unused, and they're needing to be used up in the next 2 years. So this amendment is switching $14 million of general funds to $14 million of ARPA federal funds. And that will increase the money to the floor, that we call it, by $14 million. However, then the amendment for this $1 million, it's going to be general funds, will then change that increase from 14 million to 13 million. So we'll still have a $13 million increase to the bottom line on the budget. And that's why I agreed that we could do general funds, because we're freeing up 14 million, but we're just going to allocate 1 million of that. So we'll have $13 million increase after this is adopted. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. To answer Senator Erdman's question, and I did go over and talk to him as well. My understanding is that the auditor was happy and even wanted this language. Part of the reason is because we're starting a sort of a larger conversation here of making sure that we follow up about our ARPA funds, making sure that we continue to look after them. Even though we passed 1014 last year, we don't want it to be out of sight, out of mind. We want to make sure that we're continuing to follow up, because these will be used over the next several years. We're wanting to keep track of where we're at, where the interest is at, all of those things. So putting it sort of in the budget itself will help us to say, both to the federal government, to everyone else around, we're keeping track of this. We're on it. We're watching this. This is important, and we're going to continue to do that. This is, of course, only the first step. This is a one-time audit, but there will continue to be a need for an audit of this money for a long time to come, and needing for us as legislators to keep our eyes on it and what's happening with it into the future. So I think this is a very good use of this intent language to make sure that everyone's aware that we're watching this. We haven't forgot about it. And we will continue to do so in the future. And there may be at some point a need for, in a couple of years, some kind of interim study or something to look at it again. But for now, I think this should be adequate. And I do really want to thank the auditor for his willingness to participate in this and his willingness to do this audit to keep us on track and to make sure that we are not going to have any clawbacks and to keep just the transparency going. So I think that's the answer to that question, Senator Erdman, and I'm happy to answer any other questions that anyone would like to ask me on the mic or otherwise. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Conrad announces some guests in the North Balcony, ninth graders, teachers, and sponsors from North Star High School in Lincoln. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator DeBoer, you are recognized to close on your amendment and waive closing. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 1662. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
33 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, concerning Legislative Bill 814, next amendment from Senator McKinney, AM 1668. Senator.
Senator McKinney, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. AM 1668 is a friendly amendment. Since last week, I had some discussions with Chair Clements of the Appropriations Committee about putting this language in to ensure that the Department of Punitive Services completes a classification study, a custody staffing analysis, an analysis of behavioral health staff for correctional facilities, and an evaluation of programs as contracted pursuant to LB 896, which was passed last year. I think this is a good compromise between myself and the Appropriations Committee to ensure that the Department of Punitive Services does what we told them to do and hold them accountable, especially if this body is going to vote to build a new prison, not a replacement prison, because remember, NSP is not closing anymore. So this is a friendly amendment. I don't know where Senator Clemens is at, but we talked, and I encourage everybody's vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise today in support of AM 1668. I spoke with Senator McKinney about this a little bit earlier. I know we're all kind of getting up to speed with all these amendments, but it did sound as though he'd worked with other individuals to make sure the language of this was something that I think hopefully is agreeable to all. I see that Senator Wishart and Senator Vargas are both in the queue, so hopefully they can give us a little more information about that. I wanted to speak a little bit more to the substance of this. So I supported both of Senator McKinney's prior amendments onto 814 when we were on general file for the core purpose that I think that if we're going to be building a new prison, it only makes sense to make sure that we are doing it in a way that is based on data, based on information, and that we're holding to account the people that we've asked to do things in the past. So the fact that there's been this classification study ordered, and I put that in air quotes for the transcribers, in the past, but we haven't seen any results is problematic. What we know from looking at our prisons is that people are not receiving the proper care they need. We know that they're not receiving appropriate mental health care, and we know that due to a number of issues, all of which are somewhat related to prison overcrowding, but also related to staff shortages, we see folks who are incarcerated not getting the mental health care, the substance use treatment, and the things that they need need to better facilitate reentry and ultimately make our communities safer. And so whenever we hear people talk about wanting safe streets, safe communities, I think what they miss is that we have to be doing things like what's being asked in Amendment 1668 in order to understand the best and most effective way to run the DCS facilities in order to better facilitate reentry. So specifically, there's 3 components on here, it looks like. Which concurrent with the authorization of funding, DCS or Department of Correctional Services has to then do that classification study, which shall be submitted electronically to the clerk of the legislature by December 31st, 2023. Shall language in there, I think, makes it a little bit more steadfast. It gives it teeth. In addition to that, a custody staffing analysis and an analysis of behavioral health staff for state correctional facilities, which shall be submitted electronically by June 30th of 2025. So that's doing an analysis of staffing and figuring out where we are with regard to behavioral health. And then obviously an evaluation of programs with reports submitted electronically to the clerk of the legislature. So I wish this included some of the other language. I think that Senator McKinney is spot on in his prior conversation about asking for a commitment to actually not utilize NSP or the state pen anymore moving forward if we're going to be investing this money to build a new prison. I'm very, very curious as to what the hesitation is by some others and their unwillingness to get rid of NSP. But I do think that the language here, while not addressing all of the concerns, is a small step forward in ensuring that we're handling our prison overcrowding crisis and our DCS funding moving forward effectively. And so I would urge my colleagues to support AM 1668. I think this is one piece of the puzzle in our larger conversation surrounding criminal justice, but I do want to thank Senator McKinney for his tireless efforts, making sure this amendment has proper language in it. And with that, I would yield the remainder of my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Wishart, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to rise and echo my support for AM 1668, introduced by Senator McKinney. This is a amendment that he worked on with the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and I was part of some of those discussions and do consider this a friendly amendment and appreciate the work that Senator McKinney's done on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Similarly, we had this vote. I believe for one of these votes, I was either not voting or no, not because of the intent. I absolutely support the intent, but I wanted to make sure is that we can put this language into the budget in a way that still met the need of what was happening, but also made it fundamentally clear that we need the studies done by the end of this year, submitted to the legislature, submitted to the Appropriations Committee, and appreciate Senator McKinney work with us as a committee to make sure that we can get this done. I consider this a friendly amendment, and even beyond a friendly amendment, a necessary amendment that we are telling the executive branch exactly what we need in terms of, and the new leadership in corrections, exactly what we need in terms of following through on these studies and everything that is needed for us to move forward. Because it is what was committed to us, as what was previously discussed by Senator McKinney. It was the commitment that we made previously, and we should be following through on that commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I consider this a friendly amendment. Senator McKinney had 2 other versions that I did oppose, and we continued to work on language. The concern I had was if studies keep going on, that construction would never be beginning. And the language here says that the studies will be concurrent with correctional services building new facilities. And so they already are ongoing. The department intends to do the studies on the needs for correctional facilities. And this language here means that it's going to be happening, it would happen at the same time rather than preventing any progress on construction of a new facility. until the studies are all done. And so that is why I'm supporting this now. And I had previously opposed the language previously. I interpreted it as prohibiting planning and construction until the studies were completed. This makes them be able to go concurrently as we go along with the progress of that project. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Arch, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. If Senator McKinney could yield to a question.
Senator McKinney, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Just one quick question as follow-up. You've got dates in here. Is it physically possible for the Department of Corrections to hit the deadline that you've set here?
Yes. All three of these are already ongoing and they're on track. So yeah, they can hit them.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator McKinney, you're recognized to close on the amendment and waive. Senators, the question is the adoption of AM 1668. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
42 ayes, no nays on adoption of AM 1668.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, next item, Senator Jacobson would offer AM 1734.
Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm bringing this amendment. It's really put in the budget was intent language, which mirrors the language in my LB 433. It has to do with budgeting and budgets for regional behavioral health districts. There are 6 behavioral health districts that are part of DHHS across the state. North Platte and my district is part of a 17-county Region 2 mental health district, regional health and behavioral health district. We ran into an issue a year ago where we had to forego $1.2 million that was budgeted in their budget for Region 2 because what was in the budget were guidelines from DHHS that affected every behavioral health district, and there was an inability to move those dollars around to the needs that were specific to our region and also was consistent with the providers that were available in our district. So over the years, there had been an ability to move 25% of the budget around to fit the needs of that particular behavioral health district. Now, I might add there's 17 counties, 17 board members that are county commissioners from each of those counties that make up the local board. Our regional behavioral health director has been there for almost 40 years, knows the rules inside and out. This is a critically important component to every part of the state, but particularly our part of the state as well, in dealing with behavioral health needs. $1.2 million of programming dollars is real money to us, and we were denied that money because when they requested that the money be redirected for other behavioral health needs that were consistent with state and federal guidelines, they were denied. Now that person is no longer with DHHS. I've had conversations with DHHS since, and of course, that's why I brought LB 433, was to create a requirement that the regions would have a 20% discretionary money, provided it was consistent with state and federal guidelines. There was a fiscal note put on it by DHHS of $1.6 million, suggesting that they were going to need to hire 10 people to make sure that this money was spent appropriately. I found it interesting because during the hearing before HHS committee, the question was asked by Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, so did you fire 10 people when you did away with allowing the 25% discretion? And the answer, of course, was no. But now they needed to hire 10 more people. So fortunately, the intent language that was added to the budget that basically mirrored what was in my LB 433. I have had some conversations with DHHS since that time. They did make some modifications to the contracts that have gone out to each of the behavioral health districts. They feel that they're workable at this point if that stays in place. And so at this point, what I'm doing is this is a negotiation between DHHS, myself, and the behavioral health districts. And we've made some modifying language to not give a blanket 20% discretion, but rather putting the intent language to say that if they need to move the dollars around, they could notify DHHS. They would have 30 days to either approve or deny it, but the only way they could deny it would be if it was inconsistent with state or federal regulations. So this is a friendly amendment as it relates to DHHS is okay on this. The behavioral health districts are okay on it. And of course, I'm okay with this. I do plan to leave LB 433 where it's at in committee and leave it there to just, I've always liked the term trust but verify. I think DHHS is going the right direction here, but I want to make sure that happens. So this is a compromise, and so I would urge your green vote on AM 1734, which is basically softening some of the language that was in LB 433. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Doran, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to echo the support and everything for AM 1734 that Senator Jacobson has brought in appropriations through the years. We have, I call it, appropriated or allocated certain types of funding or certain things they could do with it. One of the things that we did several years ago was that they could move some of this funding around when they came to the end of their budget or their budget cycle part, that if they had extra fund in one program, they could move it to another. Many of those have been denied. We heard from a lot of the behavioral health people about some of the issues they had with it, and Senator Jacobson did a very good job of explaining it and explaining. I very much like the amendment that now they are going to make a decision within the 30 days, and it has to be that it doesn't meet the federal rules or guidelines. So very much in favor of this. Thanks, Senator Jacobson, for bringing this in. Hopefully we can help some of those situations so that the funding now can be used when we appropriate it. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Doran. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to close and waive closing on AM 1734. Senators, the question is the adoption of AM 1734. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
41 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, next item, Senator Clements would move to amend with AM 1736.
Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the fix-it amendment, I call it, regarding that $1 million fund, one-time expense for pregnant mothers for housing them and in Lincoln. And the amendment will strike the use of TANF funds and insert general funds for the source of the funding. And again, there's this amendment we previously did for child welfare, freed up $14 million of general funds. This will use $1 million of that, so we're still positive $13 million on the amendments we're doing this so far. And I thank you for your patience, and I ask for your green vote on AM 1736.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. I wanted to rise to support the amendment that Senator Clements brought forward, and I wanted to thank him for being responsive to the concerns that were raised in regards to what is, of course, a noble endeavor to provide support and services to pregnant and parenting young people, but doing it with a fidelity to the appropriate source of funds. So, that I guess perhaps this is an example, and sometimes it's not always pretty, of why debate and deliberation is important, because it helps to identify issues or concerns that are brought forward with the different measures from individual senators or out of the jurisdictional committees. And it gives us an opportunity to figure out if we can find a way to agree on the intent of the proposal. If we need to make technical adjustments to address those concerns, we have the ability to do that. And it's part of the debate. Sometimes it's messy, but it's important. And I appreciate Senator Clements and the Appropriations Committee and the other stakeholders working on this for being responsive to the concerns that were addressed. I truly, sincerely appreciate that. I also am eager to continue the conversation with the Health and Human Services Committee, the Governor Pillen's administration, and other stakeholders and other senators who've expressed a great deal of interest in learning more about the TANF program and the TANF rainy day funds, so that we can finally put our heads together over this interim and figure out a sustainable plan to utilize funds appropriately, to be good stewards of the taxpayer funds, and to ensure fidelity to those funds that have built up over a 10+ year period, with the recognition and understanding that we really don't need to grow government to do that. We just need to make sure that the people who those funds are intended for have the ability to draw down those funds to meet their family's basic needs. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Clemens, you're recognized to close on the amendment and waive closing. Senators, the question is the adoption of AM 1736. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
41 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment.
AM 1736 is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, next item, series of withdrawals. Senator Clements, AM 1673 with a note to withdraw. And then Senator Ben Hansen, AM 1578 and 1604, both with notes to withdraw those.
Those are withdrawn.
In that case, Mr. President, next item is Senator Wayne would move to amend with AM 1653.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. This is not taking any additional money or anything. It's just making sure that we recognize all the significance of Fort Robinson. So I just want to take a brief moment for those who don't know and have not visited this area in the 3rd District, Fort Robinson. The fort was originally built in 1874. It was small and a third-rate outpost that had no right-minded person would ever want to go and be stationed at. Eventually, there have been permanent structures and infrastructure that was built, and the relationship between the United States Cavalry and this fort cannot be emphasized enough. This is part of another bill that I hope we can find some dollars to make it work. It's called the Preserve the Third Act, because I think as Nebraskans, we need to really preserve the cultural significance that are in our 3rd District that relates to not just American history, but subsections of American history, such as Native American history and African American history. This is where U.S. cavalry were trained, and some of the best horses, if not all the horses in the cavalry, were brought here and bred there to be local stock from the area. In 1885, the 9th Cavalry was stationed at Fort Robinson, and it underwent significant expansion and investment by the federal government. The 9th Cavalry was one of the few nations segregated to all-black regiments. They ultimately became known collectively as the Buffalo Soldiers, and it was a referencing point that started because the African Americans' hair and the head of the buffalo were similar, so they started calling them the Buffalo Soldiers in Cheyenne. The 9th Cavalry is one of the most famous regiments in American history, fighting bravely on different planes and different wars, and eventually fighting along the side of Theodore Roosevelt at the Battle of San Juan Hill during the Spanish-American War. Afterwards, distinguished members of this regiment were honored by being among the first crop of park rangers hired for the National Park Service. So from a historical perspective in African American history, the 9th Cavalry Regiment and the Buffalo Soldiers have significance in our history, and it still remains there today. What this amendment does is just make sure that we dedicate some dollars, up to $2 million, for the Buffalo Soldiers, what I would say interpretation and building of helping an additional building. They have some buildings out there that reference them, but overall, we want to make sure that there's some dollars that go to them. So besides just the 9th Cavalry, one of the reasons why this is a hollow site is because this is a place where Crazy Horse surrendered and many will say murdered at Fort Robinson during the Robinson Breakout of the Massacre, where 60 Native Americans were trying to escape to freedom were hunted down in what the Supreme Court described as a shocking story. A side note, this was not why the 9th Cavalry was stationed there, but significant history among the American natives. And if you go out there, they have a place and a rock and many rocks, but one in particular that symbolizes where Crazy Horse actually died. There's some other significance that also plays a huge role. In 1955, we started having most of our horses trained out there, part of the Army. During World War II, we had our POWs stationed out there. And that is actually just a prairie land that sometimes we have to figure out in the future how to invest to show this history. They've updated, did renovations on RV parks and camping grounds, but for the senators who took a trip out there a couple weeks ago, I think they saw the significance of what we can do if we invest to boost our economy in a way that keeps honoring the Native Americans and the African Americans and the soldiers and the POWs who are out there, but also drive tourism. Right now, about 600,000 people go through Fort Robinson, and I believe we can double that in the next 2 to 3 years by strategic investments in this area. If you haven't been out there, when Senator Brewer speaks of God's country, it truly is. And to climb up on the bluff out there and watch the sunset go down, I was listening to some music and started singing. I don't know if my colleagues like my singing, but it is a magical place that Omaha has often forgot about, And when Senator McKinney and I were out there, we talked about we need to take a busload just to go out there and see the history and be there and know what people had to go to walk, what would take us 7 hours to drive, but ride there on horses, and the significant impact that this area had on our history. Fort Robinson, if you want to be blunt about it, that was a genocide where the Red Cloud Agency was, where if you went there, you were sent there as a Native American to die. And to be among that sacred ground and us not to invest, I think, is a disgrace. And I'm glad we've already preserved it, but this is an opportunity for us to maximize and honor those who went before us and the actual history of those who were out there in that area that served this country and made this country what it is and provided what I would say an opportunity to change the path for many African Americans by being a part of these segregated armories. And if you haven't been out there, I guess got to keep saying you should go. So I want to thank Brewer for helping us go out there. And I'll ask for your green vote. It doesn't change. It doesn't add any money. It just says while we must update Fort Robinson generally, we need to make sure up to $3 million is particularly dedicated to the Buffalo Soldiers and the 9th and 10th Cavalry that are out there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Hansen has guests in the north balcony, fourth graders from Oakland Craig Elementary. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of Senator Wayne's amendment. I have been out to Fort Robinson. I really don't think of all the places I've been in Nebraska and lived here most of my life. I'd never been there until I was in the legislature. And I too owe that probably to Senator Brewer's. I think I've been out there 3 or 4 times since I've been in the legislature. It is literally a walk through history. From our earliest days in Nebraska and through World War II. And it is underutilized because I think people aren't aware of it. I also think when we were there, we have one of the largest tourist attractions we have in Nebraska for out-of-state visitors is Lake McConaughey, which Senator Brewer, Senator Wayne can help me on this, but in Nebraska driving terms, I think it's like 2 hours from Lake McConaughey. It also is not that far from Deadwood, South Dakota. It's very family friendly. It's inexpensive. We should be attracting people just not from greater Nebraska, but from Colorado and South Dakota and Wyoming. It is beautiful. It's unlike any place in eastern Nebraska. And I think unless you've been there, you really can't understand. And I do think the story of Crazy Horse and the fact that, according to Senator Wayne, I haven't been there, there's museums in South Dakota, and yet it was in Nebraska where he died and where his story is told. We're not putting as much focus on that as we need to. And I really think the ability to pull tourists from other states, which they're already coming, we just need to pull them further north or further south, would be helpful to the state's revenues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Brewer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to follow on the comments by Senator Wayne and stand in support of AM 1653. We had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to take a number of senators out to Fort Robinson. I thought the description that Senator Wayne did was very appropriate, because Fort Robinson is unique in that it's the history of the 9th, actually, and the 10th Cavalry. Both of those are regiments of the Buffalo Soldiers. But it's also unique in its history of the Cheyenne and the Cheyenne breakout that happened there. It's got a tremendous amount of history on the Plains Indians, specifically the Sioux, and the events that essentially ended the Sioux's time in western Nebraska and consolidating them on a reservation. The death of Crazy Horse, all of that happened there. Besides the prisoner of war camp, the dog training, the fact that for a good share of the 1870s, 80s, and 90s, all of the mounts or remounts, as they were called, were trained at Fort Robinson. So there's a lot of history with Fort Robinson. It needs to be consolidated and put into a way that people can go there and appreciate it and see it. And I think this is a good way to honor the 9th Cavalry and what they did. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Wayne, I want to hire you to advertise for Western Nebraska. I think your comments were spot on. And sometimes when you live real close to the forest, you don't see the trees. But being in the western part of the state is totally different. And Senator Wayne has realized that. That's not his first time that Senator Wayne has been in the West. He has come out to the turkey hunt, so he understands what it looks like 400 miles from Lincoln. So Senator Wayne, I appreciate that. I also appreciate that you understand the history and the things that have happened at Fort Robinson. That very well could be the best kept secret in the state is Fort Robinson. And so doing something there to improve tourism, to tell our story, to allow others to see what it is we see daily is very important. And that's why the Appropriations Committee has designated the money that we've appropriated for Fort Robinson, because we want to tell our story. We want people to see what it is they're missing. And so, Senator Wayne, our wording or our language said construction, and I hadn't thought through exactly what all the construction may encounter or involve or include. And so we're going to refurbish the bakery. We're going to do some things to the other facilities that are on the premise, and it'll be an advantage for everybody who comes there. And we hope that 600,000 is the low number that attends. We hope that improves, very similar to what happened when we moved the state fair. So, Senator Wayne, thank you for your words. Thank you for coming to see us in the West, and we appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of AM 1653 by Senator Wayne. I had the opportunity to go out to Fort Robinson, and it was a great experience. I learned some things that I didn't know. I saw some things I never saw in my life, and especially as it pertained to the Buffalo Soldiers. I think it's history that should be out there, and we should mark it as a state and ensure that all Nebraskans know that there were Buffalo Soldiers in the state that, you know, did some amazing things during their time here. And which is why I support this. I think when we start to highlight things like this, it puts our state in a better light. I think a lot of times when people think about Nebraska from other states, they don't think anything has ever happened here. A lot of times they don't even think there's Black people in Nebraska. So I think it's a rich history that should be uplifted, and we should pay more attention to it, because not only just for a Black kid in North Omo, I think a kid, no matter where you're at in the state, we should know the history of our state, and we should understand it and its richness, from Crazy Horse to the Buffalo Soldiers and so on. So that's why I support AM 1653. And with that, thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I did vote to authorize $10 million of construction funds for Fort Robinson, but we did not discuss in committee a specific building like this Buffalo Soldier proposal. I have not seen an estimate of construction costs or design. I know that the design of a building on Fort Robinson has to be period specific and put on the same foundation area where the original buildings were. I would prefer to allow the Game and Parks Commission to determine the cost of a building and to the priority of which buildings are needing to be constructed or improved. And so I'm not supporting of this amendment. I think it would be fine to make it a suggestion to the Game and Parks Commission and their staff to look into this proposal, but I think they have other items that they're wanting to do as well. So I'm unable to support AM 1653 at this time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this bill was originally in front of government, and we handed a very detailed budget out for both the Mayhew Cabin, Fort Robinson, and Standing Bear Museum creation. We removed this one section because appropriations thought it was a good idea to include just this portion. But the other two are going to be a floor amendment separate from 531, and we'll see how the body decides on those two other things. But here's the reason why this happened after my tour. When we went out there wasn't even a book on the Buffalo Soldiers. When we went out there was one barrack that said this is where they lived along with other people during other times. This is a significant history that we should preserve. Now it says up to 2 million or a minimum of 2 million. And if they can't, and let me show you how you have to build out there. Because this is a national historic site, they can only build what was there at the time. So they would have to make sure that it looks the same, that it is the same, and all of those things. But there is just one statue, not even a statue, a plaque around Buffalo Soldiers and one room around Buffalo Soldiers. So I'm saying if we're gonna put 10 million in our budget for 2 years, which equals 20, we should be able to carve off or intentionally say $2 million of that should go to some significant history that is a part of our American history. I don't see anything wrong with that. If they can't, the Game and Parks, as they start building, and by the way, Buffalo Soldiers building an exhibit was a part of the budget that was handed out at government and handed out multiple times to different people on this floor, they'll come back and they won't spend it. Trust me, Game and Parks has not spent money when they can't spend it. They have a big cash reserve fund that we all looked at this year. My point is that this is a way to make sure we preserve and enhance one significant area around one of our most historical pieces. Senator Brewer brought me a book when I was out there. Don't worry, it was under the valuation of a gift. But literally, the part dealing with the Buffalo Soldiers was called Transition Period. And it was listed with POWs, horses, canine units, and a couple pages on Buffalo Soldiers. But if you don't understand the rich history of Buffalo Soldier, and by the way, that is all in the 3rd District, not just Fort Robinson, but in Valentine, there was a fort where the 9th and 10th Cavalry were split. The 9th was at Fort Robinson, and 10th was over at Fort Valentine. And they kept going back and forth, but this is a significant area that this played a part in. So I don't think, again, this is no additional money. And I don't think it's taking 10% out of 20 million over 2 years to dedicate to that part of history is a bad thing. I think it's something we should do. So there isn't just a plaque, that there's more than just that. And I'm sure if they feel that they can't spend it for some reason, although they gave us a budget saying they can, they will tell you all next year. But after being there and seeing the lack of support for this significant history in my culture, this is my opportunity to make sure that we raise this to the level that it deserves of being out there, being shown to the world, and being relevant so we don't lose it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've asked Senator Salama, I think she's following me in the queue. We're going to take 10 minutes here to hopefully that our good friends, Senator Clemens and Senator Wayne, can work this out, because I don't want to pick. So they've got 10 minutes, and I will try to think what to talk about. I will go to Game and Parks. So we have Fort Robinson up at the northeast corner, and they do a good job. They were very gracious to us when we were out there. For any of you with large families, one of their biggest summer times, they're booked almost all summer. A lot of his family reunions. They've remade these homes to look familiar 100 years ago on the same foundations. They have like 5 bedrooms and a kitchen, and like every time I go out there, I think I should book for my crew. Be easier than at my house. It's a little bit primitive. I mean, it's not the Hilton, but it is, you're outside and you can run all day long, up the hills, down the hills, all around. We have a lot of those kinds of treasures in Nebraska, in my opinion, that are underutilized. I live in the eastern part of the state. I have all my life. I grew up pretty close to where, well, I grew up in Senator Salama's district, and we have Nebraska City, which is unbelievable what they have done in Nebraska City. And I will let Senator Salama talk to that because she's more aware than I am. But I know that my grandchildren are very lucky. They've been to Fort Robinson, they've been to Nebraska City, and they frequently, and I love it, come to my house. And close to my house, we have, I don't know, I think it's maybe 15 minutes to I can't believe it. Mahoney State Park. It's maybe 12 minutes to Schramm. I think it's 8 minutes to Twin Rivers. It's a little farther to Platte River State Park because you have to go over the bridge, have to go over the Platte River, and you have a choice at that intersection. Where do you go to Mahoney? If you don't go to Mahoney, you can go the other way and you go to Platte River. I'm not a golfer, but I think somewhere between where you get off to go to the Platte River State Park, there's this gorgeous golf course. I'm not a golfer, but I've been there a couple times. It's gorgeous. That whole area is underutilized. One of my dreams is someday we connect all those parks, Schramm, Twin Rivers, Mahoney, and Platte, on a walking trail, a cycling trail where Nebraskans can go and also ride horses. And maybe Senator Wishart would like to punch in here because I know one of her favorite places is Mahoney Park. And I think she's been known to take her horse and ride there. You can actually rent horses there and ride. I think also hopefully in the appropriations, we're getting this worked out. There's going to be some money to refresh, I guess would be the best word, the lodge at Mahoney because it needs some updating. We have these great treasures that I probably wouldn't know so much about if I didn't have 6 grandsons, 2 granddaughters, but 6 grandsons between the age of, what are they now? I think 10 months to 12 in that age group that need a lot of running. Because if they're inside and there's limited space, we all know what happens when boys that age are inside with limited space. They need a lot of space. So I think all we can do here in the legislature to help Game and Parks really focus on our parks. I know we spent a lot of time talking about the game part of it, but I don't think we spent enough time appreciating all that we have in parks in Nebraska. And with that, I would yield to Senator Salama so she can tell us about her part of the world.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Salama, you have 54 seconds.
My goodness. Thank you so much, Senator Linehan. You are just so generous with your time, and I appreciate that. We do have a number of really incredible state parks in District 1. I was just out the other weekend with my family to Indian Cave State Park. I know several people in the legislature have been down there to visit or camp. It's gorgeous this time of year. I know most people wait to visit until the fall, but it really is stunning year round. I am so grateful for the discussion this morning talking about a really key part of our state's history. And Senator Wayne, to his credit, has fought for the preservation of our history on all sides of the state, including in my own district at Nebraska City. And I'd just like to take a moment to read from the
That's your
marker.
time, Senator, but you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to take a moment to just read the historical marker that honors the Buffalo Soldiers at Fort Robinson to really just drive home the incredible men who made up the 9th and 10th Cavalry. So Black soldiers of the 9th and 10th Cavalry regiments, called Buffalo Soldiers by the Plains Indians, garrisoned Fort Robinson for 18 years and played an important role in northwestern Nebraska's history. Organized in 1866, the regiments first served in the Southwest. In 1885, the 9th Cavalry arrived at Fort Robinson, which was regimental headquarters from 1887 to 1898. The Black troopers helped build the new post during the fort's 1887 expansion and were the first cavalrymen sent to the Pine Ridge Reservation during the Ghost Dance Trouble of 1890. Lieutenant John Alexander, the second African-American graduate of West Point, and Henry Plummer, the first Black chaplain in the regular army, served here. So did 10 Buffalo Soldier Medal of Honor men. In 1902, the men of the Fighting 10th Cavalry, veterans of the Battle of San Juan Hill, made their headquarters here. 4 years later, the 10th helped capture Ute Indians who had fled their Utah reservation. The last military action against Indians on the Northern Plains. In 1907, the regiment left for duty in the Philippines. Okay, and what you're seeing right now on the floor is how our legislature works at its best. Thankfully, we're able to take some time and talk about an important part of Nebraska history while members of the Appropriations Committee were negotiating a compromise. And I have a note from Senator Linehan, who so generously gave me her time to stall, noting that they have an agreement. So I think if you are watching the legislature this morning and are confused, this is how the legislature is supposed to work. Two disagreeing groups got together, made a compromise, and I think we're going to have a really great agreement here that I look forward to Senator Clements and Senator Wayne telling me about. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have worked out an agreement to strike the word construction of an additional building and strike and to change the fixed dollar amount of $2 million to say up to $2 million shall be used for the purpose of honoring Buffalo soldiers, which still directs the agency to do something to honor Buffalo soldiers, but it doesn't prescribe the dollar amount, and it does not involve construction of a building. And so that will be the amendment following this. And so I urge your green vote on AM 1653 with the commitment from Senator Wayne that he has a floor amendment coming up next that will modify the description that I just gave. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. There is going to be a floor amendment that inserts up to $2 million, and then it strikes the word construction for additional, and it says simply up to $2 million for the purposes of honoring the Buffalo soldiers. Actually, sometimes on the floor, when you work with your colleagues, you actually come up with a better amendment than you first drafted, because the up to and the allowing for the flexibility for renovation, more importantly, more artwork and historical value by giving the flexibility for game and parks is actually a better thing than just necessarily limited to a construction of a building. So I want to thank Senator Clements, thank Senator Wishart, thank Senator Senator Linehan and Senator Slama for buying us some time. Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask, well, is the floor amendment coming up next? Okay, so do I have to close or how are we doing this? So I would ask you to vote green on the AM. Never mind, it's up there on the board. I'm confused. All right. I'm gonna ask you to vote green on the AM, then the floor amendment comes right afterwards, and we'll insert the language that Senator Clements and I agreed on. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. The question is the adoption of AM 1653. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
44 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment.
AM 1653 is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Wayne would move to amend with FA 112.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open on the floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, this corrects the amendment we just passed to say up to $2 million for the purposes of honoring Buffalo soldiers. I'm just going to end with this, and it'll be brief, and I'll waive my closing. I think this is one of the most underinvested areas in this state. I think the city of Crawford should be our Deadwood. And if you look at historically from Crawford to Deadwood up to Rapid City, there was an old train line that not only the Buffalo soldiers and Native Americans ran, but it was part of our train system and actually started out in Elkhorn Valley and it connected to Omaha. And if you think of that train line and that connection, and you think about Mount Rushmore, the ability to build up around Fort Robinson and turn Crawford into our kind of tourist town where we can stay and hop on a bus and go up an hour and a half to Rapid City and see Mount Rushmore at almost half the cost of what it would cost to stay at Rapid City. I think this is a prime opportunity for us to start investing in that area. I think it's a prime opportunity for start investing in our history and preserving our history. So I would ask for a green vote, and I think this is a huge step in preserving our culture across the Nebraska and America. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. No one else in the queue, and Senator Wayne's waived. Closing on the floor, Amendment 112. All those in favor, Senators, the question is the adoption of FA 112. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk, record.
43 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the floor amendment.
FA 112 is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, next amendment on on LB 814, Senator Conrad would offer AM 1671.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. The amendment before you has two primary components related to the Department of Corrections. So the first would be, in essence, a direct appropriation to the university and specifically to the University of Nebraska at Omaha to continue to engage in data and analysis to assist us in projecting our prison population so that we can make appropriate assessments for facilities into the future. So you might remember that we had pretty specific and comprehensive data analysis done when the state invited CSG in about 2014, 2015. We had very similar data analysis and projections as part of the CJI effort that was conducted, I believe, in about 2021, 2022. Those are both critical snapshots that we have available in regards to our prison population and projections, but we don't currently have an in-state ongoing opportunity to ensure objective information to help us plan for what we need to do in regards to the Department of Corrections. That will assist us both from a building a prison or future facilities kind of perspective and a smart justice perspective. It would be approximately, generally speaking, about $100,000. The impetus behind that additionally just being that better information equals good government. And when we have data-driven solutions, we can be better stewards of the taxpayer dollar and have a better understanding of the implications of our work in appropriations and the Judiciary Committee. The other component of the measure, also about $100,000-ish, there's kind of an ish, I guess, from an appropriations perspective, is an additional staff person for the Office of the Inspector General for Corrections. This office was created many years ago. It used to be for quite a long time just a one-person shop. Now the legislature has saw fit to expand that in recent years. This would add a third person to that critical legislative services and oversight kind of work, particularly as our prison population continues to expand, so that we have an appropriate window into what's happening there and can act upon that information as well. It's my understanding that this additional position was a part of the Legislative Council or the Executive Board's budget request. It didn't really kind of rise to the level for immediate action in the Appropriations Committee budget proposal, but it is aligned with our institutional thinking in regards to staffing for that key issue. I'm happy to answer any questions and appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I do rise in support of AM 1671. I had a chance to talk with Senator Conrad a little bit prior to her opening here on this. And my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, folks on the committee, is that this was considered or talked about, but ultimately I don't believe was just outright rejected. And so I think it's an important thing to have a conversation about on the floor to make sure that folks kind of understand why this is important. And so in a world where I'm kind of trying to look at this from a 30,000-foot view, this seems like a two-pronged approach to continued oversight and accountability for correctional systems. I'll let others maybe talk a little bit more about the funding for the study, because I do think that's an important component. But the part of this that jumped out at me as important was the additional staffing for the Inspector General. So one of the things that I think we should be doing as a state is doing everything we possibly can to ensure accountability for our correctional facilities. I believe the folks who are working at the correctional facilities on a regular basis are doing their best. But as I said earlier in the day, they're currently dealing with a lack of staffing. They're dealing with a lack of people who are coming in and being able to fulfill very specific roles like mental health needs and behavioral health needs. And when you're missing those people, it can lead to issues. When issues happen or when bad things happen in a prison facility, I think it's important that there's at least some entity that can come and do an analysis or a study or a report that can then come back to us or to others in the community, and we can learn from mistakes. I don't believe that the goal of it is to call people out or call out institutions in a way that's inappropriate, but I think that it makes this a safer community and it makes our facilities safer for everybody involved, whether it's folks who are incarcerated or correctional officers or the other staff there, if we make sure that best practices are being used. A good example of this is, recently there was this story from earlier May 2nd about the Tecumseh prison incident in 2021 that the Inspector General found was mishandled. And the facts of that are relatively compelling. Again, without delving too deep into it, this says a Nebraska State Prison watchdog has cited numerous errors by staff at the Tecumseh State Prison in a June 2021 incident in which they fired 200 projectiles at a mentally ill, disruptive inmate in an effort to subdue him. Among the many ways in which the incident was mishandled, they found that it included unnecessary and excessive use of force, and cited what they were concerned about was a lack of training, I believe, specifically not having people acting in accordance with their use of force policy. Now, ultimately, they make recommendations, right? And then the department can either adopt those recommendations or not, is my understanding. From my review of the article, I do believe that the department did accept a recommendation from the Inspector General stating that the use of force policy should include attempts at de-escalation by a licensed mental health professional for incidents involving people with known mental health issues. I do believe the department rejected another suggestion that it contracted an outside entity for additional training on responding to individuals with serious mental illness. So the reason I think this is important is you have a very small group of people who are addressing very large amounts of concerns. And if we're talking about adding extra staff to the prisons in order to help fully staff our facilities, I think on the other end, we should also be fully staffing the individuals whose job it is to do the analysis, hold them to account, and make sure that there's actual accountability in our systems. Burying our heads in the sand and not addressing problems that we see within our carceral system doesn't help anybody, and it doesn't fix anything. And so I absolutely support the efforts of Senator Conrad to further appropriate funding for, thank you, Mr. President, for the study. I also fully support the efforts by Senator Conrad to ensure that the Inspector General has the staff they need to do their job. And so happy to continue this conversation off the mic with anybody else, but I do think this is a legitimate attempt at trying to fix some of our problems with the carceral system. And I do believe this amendment is going to start a good conversation. So with that, I'd yield the remainder of my time and urge a green vote on AM 1671. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of AM 1671 for many reasons. Number one is that since our state is in the business of building prisons and not closing prisons, we should be adding more individuals to the Office of Inspector General, and we should also have tools in place to further analyze proposed legislation that people propose within this body, especially legislation to increase criminal penalties. Because just like racial impact statements and other even fiscal notes, it gives us a better understanding of what we're attempting to do as senators within this body and how those attempts can negatively or positively affect our prison population and our criminal justice system. This is something that everyone should be in support of, in my opinion. I mean, if we're going to stand up and say we're going to spend 340 plus million on a prison, there shouldn't be hesitation to provide some more oversight and also utilize tools to ensure that whatever we're going to do as a body going forward is done in the most cost-effective, logical way. Because honestly speaking, supporting a prison isn't fiscally responsible at all, especially supporting a prison and saying we're not going to close the Nebraska State Penitentiary anymore. That is the issue. And y'all all know it's an issue, but nobody wants to stand up and say that for 3 years, people were lying about the need to close the Nebraska State Penitentiary. That is the truth, and that is a fact. It was sold as a replacement prison to the Nebraska State Penitentiary because it was in such disarray that it needed to be shut down. But last week, we learned that no, people don't want to shut down the Nebraska State Penitentiary. They want to keep it open because they still want to house people there, but they also would like to build a new prison. And if we're going to do that, and if we're in the business of building prisons, we need better understanding of our criminal justice system, our programming, and all those type of things. But we also need more oversight because, like Senator Dungan mentioned, the story about the Inspector General finding that man in his cell after he was shot, 200 times with projectiles by overseers in the Department of Punitive Services. We need real oversight. And if you watch hearings, especially pertaining to things in the prisons and correctional officers come, you'll realize that we should really monitor who is hired and not hired in these facilities. And I had just went to Tecumseh maybe almost a month ago now or something like that. And I was talking to an individual in there, and I was like, how long you been here? He was like, oh, just like 2 weeks, but they got him doing all type of things. Probably not even properly trained, just threw him to the wolves because Tecumseh, for example, is so understaffed that they're still on a 4-3 schedule. So what that means is if you have family in Tecumseh, you might or might not be able to visit them, especially on the weekends, because they're basically on 72 hours of lockdown. They can't move and they can't do anything. But we're okay with that because we're in the business of building prisons that we can't properly staff. And I would guarantee that once this new prison that you all are voting for is online, it won't be properly staffed and it will be overcrowded. Then we also have people who don't want to do any policy changes in our criminal justice system, and they're holding it up, and they keep saying, wait another year, can we talk over the summer, and all these type of things they've been saying since I've been here. So this is why I support AM 1671, because it's a smart policy decision to monitor what's going on in the legislature, in our prisons, in our criminal justice system. But we also need to make sure that we have adequate oversight to ensure that overseers that within the Department of Punitive Services are doing what they're supposed to do, and they're not being inhumane towards the individuals that this state has decided to incarcerate. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Brandt recognizes guests, fourth graders from Fillmore Central Elementary, both under the south balcony and just in the north balcony. Welcome from the Nebraska State Legislature. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'm glad we're almost at lunch because I don't know where I'm at on the amendment. I know where I'm at on data. I believe in data. As a matter of fact, I was laughing to myself for two reasons. When I was first here the first 2 years and we were working on school finance, and I would go into meetings with stacks of papers this big and try to explain numbers to people, and finally Speaker Scheer said, Luann, nobody wants to look at that stuff. Stop bringing it to the meetings. So I do believe in data. But the other thing I have a question for, and I'm having a nostalgic moment here. I think the first 2 years I was here, I was on the planning committee, and I can't for the life of me remember who else was on it, but if there was somebody in my class on it besides me, it might have been Senator Vargas, now that I think about it. I would like to discuss over the noon hour. I think we already have a contract with UNO, or maybe it's not a contract, but we have some agreement with UNO. Oh, Senator DeBoer, would you yield to a question?
Senator DeBoer, will you yield to a question?
I would.
Senator DeBoer, do we have some kind of agreement or contract with UNO when it comes to planning and then providing us data?
Well, that's a complicated question.
Of course.
We have always traditionally until last year, and hopefully we will sign it again this year, where they help us with data for the planning committee. However, that data could be about whatever. I asked all of the members of this body what issues they would most like to talk about in the planning committee or what they'd like the planning committee to focus on, and they did not have corrections at the top, so we probably won't spend the most time on that. But we do contract generally with them to help us get data so that we can make long-term projections of this type. However, corrections may not be on the top of that list this year.
But it could be.
I suppose it could.
So how much, is it okay to ask how much the contract, is it an annual appropriation, or how do we pay for that?
And my understanding is it's less than what Senator Conrad is asking for here, because we do not ask for the level of detail that Senator Conrad is asking for here.
Well, could I ask that maybe you and Senator Conrad over the noon hour figure out if we can merge some of this, obviously data, any kind of data we can get is important data. And I agree and understand Senator McKinney's frustrations with this all the way around. I know it's really important to him. So if we if we could solve this without, again, working together and figure out maybe we don't need quite as much money. Maybe we could add this to what we already do with UNO, if there's some way to work that together. Because what I don't like, and you see this a lot in government, and this is why our committees are important. Committees see the whole picture, just like last night with the tax credit. Committees see the whole picture, and if they're working with UNO on something, they could add something. And when we do one-offs on the floor, which are appropriate, I'm thrilled we're having a debate on the budget. I think that's very important. But I think we need to go back and make sure that we don't put a little pocket of money over here and a little pocket of money over there, and it's not, the whole big picture is not seen. So, Senator DeBoer, does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, one thing I will say is that the money that we use through the planning committee is typically for specific hiring of student employees so that they can input data and do that sort of thing. So that is why that amount is probably less than an amount for maybe some folks who are more advanced in their career.
But it seems if we're going to if I'm going to work with an organization, legislature, UNO, we ought to at least all know what we're doing together, so we don't have little buckets here and there, and our efforts are not joined in the most productive way.
I will talk to some folks over lunch.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senators. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, your Committee on Business and Labor, chaired by Senator Reapy, reports Legislative Bill 56 to general file with committee amendments. Additionally, amendments to be printed in Senator Raybould to LB 754 and Senator Blood to LB 298. Finally, Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Lowe would move to recess until 1:00 p.m.
Senators, you've heard the motion to recess. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. We're in recess.